In this vote, the yeas are 226, the nays are 191. The motion is not adopted, or the motion is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The gentleman from Massachusetts rise.
Madam Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 767 and ask for its immediate consideration.
Report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 63, House Resolution 767. Resolved that immediately upon adoption of this resolution, without intervention of any point of order, the House shall proceed to the consideration of the House of the resolution, House Resolution 755, impeaching Donald John Trump, President of the United States, for high crimes and misdemeanors. The amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on the Judiciary, now printed in the resolution, shall be considered as adopted. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the resolution as amended to adoption without intervening motion or demand for division of the question, except as follows. A. The resolution as amended shall be debatable for 6 hours, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their respective designees. B. The question of adoption of the resolution as amended shall be divided between the two articles. Section 2. During consideration of House Resolution 755, only the following persons shall be admitted to the hall of the House or rooms leading thereto. A. Members of Congress. B. The delegates and the resident commissioner. C. The President and Vice President of the United States. D. Other persons as designated by the Speaker. Section 3. After adoption of House Resolution 755, it shall be in order without intervention of any point of order to consider in the House a resolution appointing and authorizing managers for the impeachment trial of Donald John Trump, President of the United States, if offered by the chair of the Committee on the Judiciary or his designee. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the resolution to adoption without intervening motion or demand for division of the question, except 10 minutes of debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary. No other resolution incidental to impeachment relating to House Resolution 755 shall be privileged during the remainder of the 116th Congress. Section 4. The chair of the Committee on the Judiciary may insert in the congressional record such material as he may deem explanatory of A. House Resolution 755, not later than the date, that is 5 legislative days after adoption thereof, and B. The resolution specified in Section 3 of this resolution, not later than the date, that is 5 legislative days after adoption thereof.
Does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I raise a point of order against HRS 767 for failure.
The gentleman's point of order.
I raise this point of order for failure to disclose the waiver clause 2J1 of Rule 11 pursuant to Clause 6G of Rule 13, which requires the Rules Committee to specify their report any waiver of a point of order against a measure under consideration. And Madam Speaker, this underlying resolution violates Clause 2J1 of Rule 11, which entitles the minority of the committee to have the ability to call witnesses to testify during at least one day of a hearing on any given measure. This was not afforded to the Judiciary Committee minority members during consideration of the articles of impeachment, despite numerous requests by the minority's members. Therefore, I raise a point of order against consideration of the rule and the underlying resolution for the violation of minority rights and the denial of this evidence to be put into the record and for this hearing, which the House rules require, which was not complied with and was denied. I would urge the enforcement of this rule.
The gentleman from Louisiana seeks to raise a point of order against House Resolution 767 on the grounds that the report accompanying the resolution fails to specify a waiver of a particular point of order and is thus in violation of Clause 6G of Rule 13. The gentleman is stating a matter for debate rather than a proper point of order. Clause 6G of Rule 13 is merely informational on any specified waivers, quote, to the maximum extent possible. As elucidated by Chairman Solomon in the legislative history accompanying the adoption of this rule in the 104th Congress, any, quote, failure of the Rules Committee to specify waivers in a rule would not give rise to a point of order against a special rule that waives all points of order, end quote. The chair would therefore advise the gentleman again that he is not stating a proper point of order. Massachusetts is recognized.
Madam Speaker,
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Madam Speaker, for the purposes of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma, my good friend Mr. Cole, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume. During consideration of this resolution, all time is yielded for the purposes of debate only. I ask unanimous consent that all members be given 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, on Tuesday, the Rules Committee met and reported a closed rule for House Resolution 767, providing for consideration of House H-Res 755, impeaching Donald John Trump, President of the United States, for high crimes and misdemeanors. The rule provides 6 hours of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Judiciary Committee or their designees. The rule provides that the question of adoption of the resolution shall be divided between 2 articles. The rule limits access to the House floor. It provides at any time after adoption of H-Res 755 for consideration of a resolution appointing and authorizing managers for the impeachment trial if offered by the chair of the Judiciary Committee, debatable for 10 minutes. No resolution incidental to impeachment relating to H-Res 755 shall be privileged during the remainder of the 116th Congress. Finally, the rule provides that the chair of the Judiciary Committee may insert explanatory material in the congressional record. Madam Speaker, 232 years ago, as he walked out of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, Benjamin Franklin stated that the founders had just created a republic if you can keep it. He understood that nothing was preordained, that our nation would continue to be shaped decision by decision, vote by vote, not by some other leaders in some other time, but day in and day out, both through the regular work of government and during historic moments like the one we face today. Our founders crafted the fundamentals of government to guide us. Passages like Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, giving this chamber the sole power of impeachment. But nowhere does it list exactly what constitutes a high crime or misdemeanor. In their wisdom, the founders understood they could not anticipate what the future would bring. They gave subsequent generations, us, the chance to decide precisely what our government would become, to decide with each passing day what a nation defined by the rule of law, to decide with each passing day what a nation defined by the rule of law was willing to tolerate. That is what brings us here today. To decide nearly 2.5 centuries later whether the United States is still a nation where no one is above the law, or whether America becomes a land run by those who act more like kings or queens, as if the law doesn't apply to them. Yes, Madam Speaker, this really is that serious. Over the past several months, the House of Representatives has been conducting an impeachment inquiry into the 45th President of the United States, Donald John Trump. Our inquiry is simply to answer the following question: did President Trump and his top advisors corruptly withhold official government actions to obtain an improper advantage in the next election? We now know through the hard work of our investigative committees and because of the President's own admission that the answer to that question is yes. The President withheld congressionally approved military aid to Ukraine, a country under siege, not to fight corruption, but to extract a personal political favor. President Trump refused to meet with Ukraine's president in the White House until he completed this scheme. All the while, leaders in Russia, the very nation holding a large part of Ukraine hostage, the very nation that interfered with our elections, had another meeting in the Oval Office just last week. The President of the United States endangered our national security. The President undermined our democracy. And the President, a successor to the same office as George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, betrayed his oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. These aren't opinions. These are uncontested facts. Now, I've read the details of the July 25th phone call with President Zelensky, where President Trump said, "I would like you to do us a favor, though." I've seen the televised press conference where his chief of staff openly admitted to this deal and told the nation to just get over it. Hours and hours of depositions by the Intelligence, Oversight, and Foreign Affairs Committees have been conducted, where witnesses outlined the President's direct involvement in this scheme. The evidence is as clear as it is overwhelming. If a president undermining our national security and using the federal government for his own selfish personal gain is not impeachable conduct, then, Madam Speaker, I don't know what is. Now, I've heard some on the other side suggest this process is about overturning an election. That is absurd. This is about protecting our democracy. These facts are beyond dispute. The only question now is whether we are willing to tolerate such conduct, not just today by President Trump, but furthermore by any president of either party. To not act would set a dangerous precedent, not just for this president, but for every future president. 11 months ago, many of us took an oath right here in this chamber. I've had the privilege to take that oath 12 times now, and I believe it is not just for show. It is a contract between each of us and the people we represent to place the national interest above partisan interest and to preserve those laws that make our country unique. We cannot reconcile the President's abuse of power and obstruction of Congress with the oath of office that we took. Madam Speaker, we are being tested on something greater than our ability to toe a party line, something more than our ability to score the next great television soundbite. This is a democracy-defining moment. History will judge us by whether we keep intact that fragile republic handed down to us by our forebears more than 200 years ago, or whether we allow it to be changed forever. For the sake of our country's future, I hope and I pray that my colleagues will make the right decision. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I thank my good friend, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Chairman McGovern, for yielding me the customary 30 minutes. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, Madam Speaker, today is a very sad day for all of us. For me personally, for the Rules Committee, for the entire House of Representatives, and most importantly, for the American people. For the second time in my life, the House of Representatives will be voting to impeach a President of the United States. But unlike in 1998, the decision to have this vote is not the result of a bipartisan process, nor an open or fair process. Instead, it's going to be a deeply partisan vote, coming at the end of an unfair and rushed process prescribed solely by Democrats to ensure a predetermined result. Impeachment of a president is one of the most consequential acts the House of Representatives can undertake, and it should only be done after the fullest and most careful consideration. Yet today, after a truncated investigation that denied the president due process, cherry-picked evidence and witness testimony to fit their narrative, and trampled on Republicans' minority rights, Democrats in the House are pressing forward with a partisan impeachment vote. Doing so contradicts Speaker Pelosi's own words back in March of this year, when she said that, quote, "An impeachment is so divisive to the country that unless there's something so compelling and overwhelming and bipartisan, I don't think we should go down that path because it divides the country," unquote. But if we're really being honest, Democrats have been searching for a reason to impeach President Trump since the day he was elected. In December of 2017, a current member of the majority forced a vote to impeach the president, and even then, long before there was even an impeachment investigation, 58 Democrats voted to impeach the president. And those members have only grown since then, to the point where the majority is now pushing forward with a final vote on impeachment, heedless of where it takes the country and regardless of whether or not they've proven their case. And if my colleagues in the majority believe they have proven their case, let me be clear, they have not. The entire premise of these articles of impeachment rests on a pause placed on Ukrainian security assistance, a pause of 55 days. The majority has spun creative narratives as to the meaning and the motive of this pause, alleging the President demanded a, quote, quid pro quo, unquote, but with no factual evidence to back it up. Security aid to the Ukraine was released. The administration did so without the Ukraine ever initiating an investigation into anyone or anything. It's even more startling to me that the majority wants to move forward with this resolution, given how substantially flawed and procedurally defective the entire process has been. The Judiciary Committee, which drafted these articles of impeachment, engaged in an abbreviated process, hearing from no witnesses with firsthand knowledge of the events in question. They did not conduct their own investigation and only held 2 hearings on this topic before drafting the articles, one with staff and one with constitutional law scholars. That's hardly the type of lengthy and serious consideration a topic as grave as impeachment demands. The committee actually charged with an impeachment investigation was the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, not the Judiciary Committee. But that committee, too, followed a primarily closed process. Republicans were denied the right to call witnesses or subpoena documents, and the President was denied the right to representation in the committee's hearings. Without respecting minority rights and without respecting due process rights of the President, how can anyone consider this a fair process? Madam Speaker, it gets worse. The articles of impeachment we are considering today are based on the Schiff report, the final document produced by the Intelligence Committee and transmitted to the Judiciary Committee. But the Schiff report includes unsubstantiated allegations. It includes, in some cases, news reports as the only evidence supporting so-called factual assertions, and it includes at least 54 different hearsay statements as assertions of evidence without any firsthand information from witnesses to corroborate those statements. The author of the report, Chairman Schiff, was never questioned by the Judiciary Committee, and he refused to sit for questions or to explain how his committee conducted its investigation. In fact, during the staff presentation of evidence at the Judiciary Committee, Ranking Member Collins asked how the investigation was conducted that resulted in the drafting of the Schiff report, but he never received an answer. During the Rules Committee consideration of House Resolution 755, there were numerous times when the members on both sides of the aisle posed questions to our witnesses, questions they could not answer because they sit on the Judiciary Committee and were not the author of the report that brought about HRes 755. The author has never appeared before members of the minority to explain a single thing, provide factual information supporting the many assertions it contains. Madam Speaker, this is no way to go about impeaching the President of the United States. The articles before us are based on very limited information. They are based on hearsay, on news reports, and on other unsupported allegations. They are based on a report written by a member of Congress who refused to answer questions about it. And I do not believe the allegations, which are subject to interpretation, actually rise to the level of an impeachable offense. To make matters worse, when Republicans attempted to exercise one of their rights under House rules, they were shut down by Chairman Nadler. Under Clause 2J1 of Rule 11, the minority is allowed to demand a minority hearing day. On December 4th, the Republicans on the Judiciary Committee properly exercised that right and transmitted a demand to Chairman Nadler for a hearing day at which the minority could call their own witnesses. And to be clear, Madam Speaker, a minority hearing day is not subject to the chair's discretion. It is a right, and Republicans on the Judiciary Committee properly demanded the exercise of that right. And yet, Chairman Nadler declined to allow a minority hearing day to be held before the voting of these articles. I think we can all agree that it would have been better for the institution and for the American people to allow all voices to be heard and all witnesses to be questioned before proceeding to a vote on something as this consequential. And yet the majority trampled on that right. But I suppose I should not be surprised by any of this. When the House passed H.Res. 660, the resolution setting up the official impeachment inquiry less than 2 months ago, I warned the House that the majority was doing was setting up a closed, unfair process that could only have one outcome. And today, we are seeing the end result of this closed and unfair process. A quick rush to judgment forced through not one but two committees in short order, with minority rights trampled, witnesses left unquestioned, and due process ignored. It is also disappointing that members are not being given more time to debate this issue on the floor. Last night at Rules Committee, I offered an amendment to double the amount of floor time debate from 6 to 12 hours. This would have allowed for roughly the same amount of debate time used in the Clinton impeachment, and it would have ensured that all members could have the opportunity to speak on the floor. Unfortunately, that amendment was not accepted. While I know my friend Chairman McGovern did the best he could, I do think it's ironic that when all is said and done, the 13 members of the Rules Committee spent more time discussing H.Res. 755 in committee yesterday than we will spend debating it on the House floor for every member today. I think that's a disservice to the members of this body and to the American people. Madam Speaker, we deserve better than a flawed process that led to this flawed outcome. The House of Representatives deserves better than that. The President certainly deserves better than that. More importantly, the American people deserve better than what we're doing here today. I oppose proceeding any further. I oppose the rule. I oppose this limited and unfair process, and I certainly oppose impeaching the President of the United States. With that, I urge opposition to the rule, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to ask unanimous consent. I want to insert in the record a statement, a letter that I sent with regard to the Members' Day. I want to correct. I think it's important to correct the record. There were 0 points of order that lie against H.Res. 755.
Without objection, so ordered.
And Madam Speaker, I want to yield myself 30 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
Yeah, we're here to talk about the President's behavior, and that's what I think we all should be focused on, not just process. But I want to just say that I'm proud of the process. Democrats and Republicans have had equal opportunity to participate in the months-long impeachment inquiry. Members of both parties have been involved at every stage of this process, from sitting in and asking questions in closed-door depositions to questioning witnesses in open hearings. The committees took more than 100 hours of deposition testimony from 17 witnesses and held 7 public hearings, which included Republican-requested witnesses. They produced a 300-page public report that laid out their findings and evidence. The Judiciary Committee then took that report and conducted 2 public hearings evaluating the evidence and the legal standard for impeachment before reporting out the 2 articles.
Gentleman's time's
I
expired.
yield myself an additional 15 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
President Trump was given the opportunity to participate in the Judiciary Committee's review of the evidence presented against him. He chose not to participate, and President Trump to date has not provided any exculpatory evidence, but instead has blocked numerous witnesses from testifying about his actions. At this point, Madam Speaker, I would like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from South Carolina, the Majority Whip, Mr. Clyburn.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes. Yes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding me the time. Madam Speaker, I rise today feeling the full weight of my duty as a member of this august body, reflecting upon our oath of office to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. It is my sincere belief that under the circumstances that bring us here today, there is only one path for us to take to fulfill that oath. Thomas Paine, in this first of a series of pamphlets entitled The American Crisis, published 243 years ago tomorrow, intoned that these are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldiers and sunshine patriots will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. These words were written at a time when our founders were rebelling against the tyrannical rule of the British monarchy. Today, we have a president who seems to believe he is a king or above the law. Paine warned us that so unlimited a power can belong only to God Almighty. My faith leads me to take very seriously the final words of our oath to faithfully discharge the duties of the office, so help me God. Madam Speaker, 3 days ago, I joined with a bipartisan delegation of our colleagues celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge. We laid wreaths at the memorials of Generals George Patton and Anthony McCullough. We visited foxholes that were occupied by some brave soldiers who fought in some of the worst winter weather ever visited upon a battlefield. And we visited the Luxembourg American Cemetery, the final resting place of thousands of them and General George Patton. They were not summer soldiers in their efforts 75 years ago to preserve the Republic, and we must not be sunshine patriots today in our efforts to protect the Constitution upon which this great Republic stands. While our fight is not in the trenches of battlefields, but in the hallowed halls of this Congress, our duty is no less patriotic. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself 15 seconds just to respond to my
Gentleman is
friend.
recognized.
President Trump, for the record, was not provided the opportunity to challenge the facts and still has not received the materials from the judiciary as required by H-Res 660. Another example of why this isn't a fair process. With that, Madam Speaker, I would like to yield to the gentlelady from Wyoming, the distinguished chairman of the Republican Conference, for the purpose of a unanimous consent request.
Madam Speaker,
Gentlelady.
I ask unanimous consent to amend H-Res 767 to provide for voting by a manual call of the roll, so the American people can see precisely who is supporting the impeachment of a duly elected president. Members should be required to stand and identify themselves openly and on camera on the question of adoption of these articles of impeachment.
All time has been yielded for the purpose of debate by the gentleman from Massachusetts. Does the gentleman from Massachusetts yield for this unanimous consent request?
I do not.
Gentleman from Massachusetts does not yield. Therefore, the unanimous consent request cannot be entertained. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I yield to my good friend, the gentleman from Missouri, the distinguished secretary of the Republican Conference, for a purpose of a unanimous consent request.
Gentleman shall state his request.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to amend H.R. 767 to provide for 12 hours of debate equally divided by the majority and the minority, which would allow each member of the House at least 1 minute and 40 seconds of debate, as opposed to currently 50 seconds. The people's representatives deserve the right of more than 50 seconds to be heard in this important matter.
All time has been yielded, as I said, for the purpose of debate by the gentleman from Massachusetts. Does the gentleman from Massachusetts yield for this unanimous consent request? The gentleman from Massachusetts does not yield. Therefore, this unanimous consent request cannot be entertained. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I want to yield 4 minutes to my good friend, the distinguished member of both the Energy and Commerce Committee and the House Rules Committee, Dr. Burgess of the great state of Texas.
Gentleman's recognized for 4 minutes.
And I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, yesterday the Rules Committee spent 8 hours considering whether to bring H-Res 755, the Articles of Impeachment, to the House floor. Given the 4-to-9 ratio of Republicans to Democrats on the committee, it is no surprise that we are now considering the articles before us. Despite robust debate on the so-called facts derived from the impeachment investigation and the process by which they were obtained, Democrats and Republicans remain in opposition to each other on our conclusions. As outlined yesterday by Ranking Member Collins and several members of the Rules Committee through direct quotes, some Democrats have been seeking President Trump's impeachment since his inauguration. The rush to impeach first and solidify the case second threatens the credibility of the process and threatens the credibility of the body engaged, this very House of Representatives. In fact, it's been quoted before and he'll be quoted again today, I suspect. Chairman Nadler recognized the gravity of impeachment when he stated in December of 1998, quoting here, "The effect of impeachment is to overturn the popular will of the voters as expressed in a national election. There must never be a narrowly voted impeachment or an impeachment substantially supported by one of our major political parties and largely opposed by the other. Such an impeachment would lack legitimacy and produce divisiveness and bitterness in our politics for years to come, and will call into question the very legitimacy of our political institutions." End quote. Well, on October 31st, this House voted to authorize the official impeachment investigation in HRES 660. The process outlined in HRES 660 did not include the robust minority protections afforded the minority party in previous impeachment investigations. Even more concerning, Chairman Nadler, Chairman Schiff refused to comply with the very rules of the House in granting access to committee records for members and scheduling a minority hearing in a reasonable amount of time, thus preventing the American people from being equally represented in the process. Refusing to allow members to access their own records. These are records of members of the House of Representatives, and we were not allowed to access these records obtained down in secret under armed guard in the Intelligence Committee, but it's required under Section 2E of Rule 11, and they've denied members the ability to do their job. The Judiciary Committee did not hear testimony from even one fact witness, not even one, after they received a deluge of materials from the Intelligence Committee. This reversal of responsibility is indeed unprecedented. But turning to the case upon which the argument is based, we had a whistleblower. Not a fact witness, a whistleblower who never appeared before any member of Congress that we know of, a whistleblower complaint concerning a congratulatory call between President Trump and President Zelensky of the Ukraine. The whistleblower is known to have had contact with Chairman Schiff's staff, while Republicans were denied any contact. The whistleblower complaint is not based on firsthand knowledge, and the call transcript that was to support impeachment reveals nothing more than a congratulatory phone call. Look, a request for investigation as to how American foreign aid will be spent does not equal soliciting election interference. The evidence brought before us does not amount to a high crime. Indeed, it does not amount to any crime. Democrats claim that we must protect the integrity of our election. Look, if you really cared, then I have to ask, what are we missing while we've been focused on impeachment? We tied up the Intelligence Committee, we tied up the Judiciary Committee, and oh, by the way, the Ways and Means Committee had to give up their room. They couldn't even meet while you were doing all of this. So this impeachment investigation is being painted as a protection against future interference, when in reality, President Trump's request looks back at the 2016 election. Russia is the winner in this exchange because they have disrupted the process.
Expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Madam Speaker, the gentleman is passionate about records. I should remind him that we've gotten no records from this White House, not a single document. At this time, I'd like to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentlewoman from Florida, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Shalala.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I come to impeachment with deep sadness. The facts of this case are painful and indisputable. We know that the President illegally held up congressionally appropriated aid to the Ukraine. We know that he conditioned the release of this aid on Ukrainian President Zelensky's opening an investigation based on a debunked conspiracy theory about his political rival and foreign interference in the 2016 election. We also know that the President has actively blocked congressional attempts to determine the extent of his misconduct by ordering executive branch officials to defy subpoenas and withhold information. Despite the unprecedented obstruction from the President, the evidence in this case is powerful enough that to delay this vote any further would risk interference in the 2020 election and the permanent erosion of our system of checks and balances. Madam Speaker, this is not a matter of politics. This is a matter of protecting the integrity of our democracy for the next generation. As we labor to pass on to future generations many of the great hallmarks of our society, we must also work with active stewardship and vigilance to pass on a vibrant and functional democracy. If we don't do our duty to protect the Constitution, the republic that we hand to our children will be less vibrant. If we do not do our duty to protect the Constitution, the republic that we hand to our children will be less resilient and less effective.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I yield 4 minutes to my very good friend and fellow member of the Rules Committee and of the Judiciary Committee, the gentlelady from Arizona, Ms. Lesko.
Gentlelady's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Cole, for yielding me the time. Madam Speaker, you know, God takes us on journeys in our life. And about 30 years ago, I was married to an abusive ex-husband. And when I finally left him, there were times in my life I had no money and no place to live. And I tell you what, I never dreamed in a million years that I would be standing here today as a congresswoman in the United States House of Representatives. And I tell you what, I never would have believed that I would be standing here talking about impeachment of a president of the United States. I serve on the Judiciary Committee. I also serve on the Rules Committee. I have spent hours and hours and hours reading transcripts, looking at documents, hearing testimony. And I can tell you one thing. I believe this is the most unfair, politically biased, rigged process that I have seen in my entire life. Here are the facts. There is no proof, none, that the president has committed an impeachable offense. Not one of the Democrat witnesses, not one, was able to establish that the president committed bribery, treason, or high crimes and misdemeanors as required in the U.S. Constitution. And as I've said before, the Democrats are really undermining their own argument here because 17 out of the 24 Democrat members on the Judiciary Committee voted here on this floor to move forward articles of impeachment on July 17th of this year, before President Trump's call even took place. And 5 out of the 9 Rules Committee members that are Democrats did the same thing. So if your argument is that this phone call is the main reason for this impeachable offense, why did you vote for impeachment, moving impeachment forward before the call even took place? The process has been rigged from the start. Other members have told you. I mean, never in the history of the United States have we had impeachment that's gone through the Intelligence Committee in closed-door hearings where a member of the Judiciary Committee, myself, wasn't even able to ask one single question of a fact witness. The whole thing's been rigged, been unfair. In the process that you had set forth, you made sure that the president didn't have any right to have his counsel there until judiciary, but by then it was too late. It was too late because there was no fact witnesses allowed in judiciary. So I couldn't even ask a question, nor could the president. This is the most partisan impeachment in the history of the United States. Not one Republican voted for it in Judiciary Committee, not one Republican voted for it in Rules, and not one Republican, I don't think, is going to vote for it here today. Madam Speaker, this is a sad day. I believe the Democrats are tearing this country apart. They're tearing families apart. May God continue to bless all of you. May God continue to bless the President of the United States. And may God continue to bless our great nation. And I yield back.
Members are reminded to direct their comments to the chair. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, if Republicans want to defend the President's indefensible behavior, they can do so. But I would urge my colleagues to stand up for the Constitution and to stand up for this country and our democracy. At this point, I'd like to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from California, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Mr. DeSagne.
Gentleman's recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to take a minute to thank the leadership of the Rules Committee, Mr. McGovern and Mr. Cole, for our civility last night. Although it was a long hearing and we are very much in disagreement, I felt proud to be part of that hearing, and I really want to recognize both the ranking member and the chair. The previous speaker is part of that Rules Committee, and I would just say that the passion that she demonstrated in her comments, I can't say how much I completely disagree with her, which is a statement on the environment we find ourselves in, and I unfortunately agree with some of her comments, but where the responsibility is, I would put at the White House and the President. He is the divisive one. He is not trying to heal our wounds. The reality and urgency of this moment cannot be more consequential to the American democracy. This is not a hypothetical. President Trump violated the law and solicited foreign interference in our election. At the same time, objective experts have overwhelming evidence that Russia interfered in the 2016 election and is actively engaged in undermining the 2020 elections. Our vote today and the Senate's actions on impeachment have very real long-term consequences for American democracy. Where do we go from here if the Senate does not remove him? The President has a pattern of escalating behavior. The day before the special counsel testified to Congress that the Russian government interfered in our election in sweeping and systemic fashion, President Trump made this call. 2 days before that, the President says that Article 2 of the Constitution says that he can do whatever he wants. As Washington warned in his farewell address, foreign interference tampers with domestic factions and misleads public opinion. We must honor the nation that our founders envisioned and impeach this president for violating the law and betraying the American people. I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to my very good friend, distinguished member of the Armed Services Committee, former member of the Rules Committee, Mr. Byrne of Alabama.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to the rule and the underlying resolution to impeach President Trump. When the framers granted the House the power to impeach, they feared that it would be abused. Today, those fears are realized. In record speed, this majority has assembled hearsay, speculation, and presumptions for the purpose of overturning the 2016 election. We're not here today, days before Christmas, because the majority has assembled a case against President Trump. No, we're here today because the Democrat majority believes getting impeachment done now will provide their vulnerable members time to distance themselves from their vote. But I assure you, Madam Speaker, the American people are watching. Many of my colleagues have, from day one, rejected the people's choice of President Trump. But another president will come along more to the majority's liking. Our actions here today will be remembered and will set the standard. The second article of impeachment seeks to remove President Trump for failure to produce certain requested witnesses and documents. But as the majority knows, every president in history has asserted executive privilege. The House has a legal avenue to challenge the president, the courts. But the majority has skipped this step, showing that this is about impeachment as fast as possible, however possible. Most of my friends on the other side of the aisle had no problem backing President Obama when he stonewalled the House for years to block our quest to find out the truth in the Fast and Furious investigation. That is why I filed an amendment to the resolution rejected by the Rules Committee saying, based upon the Democratic majority standard, they should have written articles of impeachment against President Obama and Eric Holder. I wish my colleagues would think about the standard being set. I predict that they will very soon regret it, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Torres.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, the facts are clear. To quote the USA Today editorial board, Trump used your tax dollars to shake down a vulnerable foreign government to interfere in a U.S. election for his personal benefit. The rule of law is what gives our great country its strength. The rule of law is what separates us from third world countries where dictators reign for decades on end. The rule of law is what makes us the envy of the world, the place that other countries look to as they grow their own democracies. And it is the rule of law that brings us here today. We never want to see the rule of law deteriorate or rampant corruption take hold. We never want to see the day when future generations flee for refuge in another country, the way that others are seeking refuge in our southern border right now. I urge my colleagues to vote yes. American values and our Constitution are worth fighting for.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to my very good friend, distinguished lady from Indiana, Ms. Lewinsky, also distinguished member of the Ways and Means Committee.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in direct opposition to this rule and in opposition to the divisive bipartisanship that is on display right now in this House of Representatives. It's no secret that Democrats have wanted to impeach President Trump since day one, regardless of any fact. They knew the result they wanted. They just needed time to figure out how to get there. So they began their impeachment inquiry. Behind closed doors, selective leaks instead of transparency, no due process. Once they'd crafted their perfect narrative, they moved on to public hearings. They hoped the American people wouldn't notice that they failed to uncover one piece of evidence to justify impeachment. They failed to make the case for this drastic action. And yet here we are. For the first time in history, a president is on the brink of being impeached with the votes of one single party. But let's be clear about one thing. This impeachment obsession is not about accountability. It's not about justice. It's not even about the Constitution. It's about pure partisan politics at its worst. And you're watching it right here. And the American people see right through this today. They've seen the rigged process. They've seen the lack of transparency and the complete absence of any supporting evidence. They know that Washington's broken. That's why they sent us here to fix it. But instead, House Democrats are dividing the country and further shaking the people's trust in this Congress. It's a sham impeachment. It's been carried out at the expense of hardworking Americans who just want us to move forward. Madam Speaker, this charade should go no farther. We should stop wasting time. Focus on what keeps our nation moving forward. Helping workers and families thrive. Protecting the safety and security of our country. I urge my colleagues to vote against the rule so we can get back to work for the American people, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New Mexico, the Assistant Speaker, Mr. Lujan.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, no one came to Congress to impeach a president. We came here to solve the mighty issues that impact the lives of the constituents we pledged to serve. I'm here because too many families in my district still rely on water trucked in from dozens of miles away. I'm here because too many New Mexican children still go to school hungry. I'm here because too many women in New Mexico drive for hours to find a doctor able to care for them. But this moment has found us. We have reached a point in time where our love of country compels action, where our duty to this republic mandates that we do what's right. The president's behavior is so blatantly wrong that ignoring his abuses of power would be abdicating the oath we made to protect this country and uphold our Constitution. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If we defeat the previous question, I will offer an amendment on the rule. The House shall not proceed to consideration of the underlying resolution until 6 conditions are met. All evidence in the possession of Chairman Schiff has been made available to the Judiciary Committee. The Chairman Schiff appeared before the Judiciary Committee to testify to the report that he authored. All underlying unclassified evidence has been made available to the public. Minority members of the Judiciary Committee have received their right to minority hearing day. Minority witnesses requested by Ranking Member Nunes and Ranking Member Collins are called and allowed to be heard in accordance with HRES 660, and subpoenas requested by Ranking Member Nunes and the Intelligence Committee are issued and enforced. Madam Speaker, to be clear, my amendment ensures that the majority does not proceed without providing a fair and equitable and transparent process, one that respects minority rights, one that opens up the investigation to all members of the House, and one that allows Republicans on the Judiciary Committee to examine the most relevant witnesses. Perhaps most crucially, it will allow all members to fully consider the information available to the committee that actually conducted the impeachment investigation, the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. The process the House has followed has been abysmal. It was closed, an unfair process, and did not respect minority rights and did not give the President due process. But we can change that today. If we defeat the previous question, the House will only move forward with a real, thorough, and ultimately fair process that all members can be proud. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of my amendment in the record, along with extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question. With that, I urge no vote on the previous question. And I yield 1 minute to my good friend, gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
I thank my good friend. The majority has thrown almost every allegation imaginable against this president, and yet these articles of impeachment that have been submitted cannot name a single actual crime. After all the drama, the majority has not found a single shred of evidence, only second, third, fourth-hand information, but the facts have remained the same. The transcript speaks for itself. There was no quid pro quo. The Ukrainian government said multiple times they felt no pressure whatsoever. The aid ultimately came, and even Speaker Pelosi said that this whole thing would have compelling, overwhelming bipartisan support. None of those things exist. I urge my colleagues to stand against the rule and the forthcoming articles of impeachment. This is a disgrace and dangerous to America, and I urge a no.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Clark.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, to paraphrase one of our founding mothers, Abigail Adams, a people may let a president fall, yet still remain a people. But if a president lets his people slip from him, he is no longer a president. Just as Abigail Adams warned, Donald Trump has let the people slip from him. He works for himself, not us. He tried to extort a foreign government into investigating a political rival, and he has unlawfully withheld witnesses and evidence. If we want a democracy, today we must stand for the rule of law. A vote to impeach is a vote to remain a government that is of, for, and by the people. It is a vote born of great fear for our future, but also rooted in optimism, that if we stand for the truth, for our Constitution, we can continue to create a country of liberty, justice, and equality for all. I yield the remainder of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Might I inquire, Madam Speaker, how much time we have remaining?
Gentleman from Oklahoma has 5 1/4 minutes remaining.
Thank
Gentleman from Massachusetts has 13 1/4 minutes remaining.
you very much, Madam Speaker. I yield 90 seconds to my good friend, the distinguished gentleman from New York, Mr. Zeldin.
Gentleman's recognized for a minute and a half.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And my colleagues on the other side of the aisle throughout this whole process, our allies in the media, they like to say that Republicans only want to talk about process, not substance, even though we continue to talk about substance as well. They declare their facts are uncontested. They just did it again. So just to maybe recap a few for everyone watching at home, as well as my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, hopefully they'll listen. President Zelensky says there was no demand, no pressure, no quid pro quo. Andrei Yermak said on December 10th that their whole story with regards to the December 1st meeting with Ambassador Sondland is completely refuted. We heard from Ambassador Sondland himself, who admitted that he heard from President Trump that he didn't want any quid pro quo, and that he was guessing when he stated otherwise. Ambassador Sondland, that is, said that he was guessing and that no one on the planet had told him otherwise. Ambassador Volker tells us that President Zelensky didn't know that there was a hold on aid on July 25th. He didn't find out until after he read it in Politico on July 29th. The aid got released shortly thereafter, and Ukraine didn't have to do absolutely anything in order to get the hold released. When our colleagues on the other side of the aisle says that the July 25th call transcript says, "Do me a favor," we have to correct it time and again. It says, "Do us a favor." And if you look at that paragraph, it's only about Ukrainians interfering in the 2016 election. Now, if you want to ignore the Charlie op-ed, Chalupa working with the Ukrainian embassy to dig up dirt, the Black Ledger to bring down the Trump campaign, whether it's Avakov's statement or origins of the Steele dossier, these are all examples. Look at Ken Vogel's reporting from January 2017. It is irrefutable. These are all substance. So stop saying that the facts are uncontested. I yield back.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record page 69 of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence's November 20th open hearing, where Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Laura Cooper testified that the Department of Defense was not able to distribute all of the aid, with $35 million not provided since it was released so late.
Without objection, so ordered.
And I also ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a November 18th AP article entitled, "U.S. Officials Knew of Ukraine's Trump Anxiety."
Without objection, so ordered.
At this point, Madam Speaker, I'm proud to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Kennedy.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Dear Ellie and James, this is a moment that you will read about in your history books. Today, I will vote to impeach the President of the United States. And I want you to know why. He broke our laws. He threatened our security. He abused the highest, most sacred office in our land. I want you to know that it does not feel good. I can't stop thinking about the cost to our country. Not just the impeachable offenses, but the collateral damage of a president who uses power like a weapon against his own people, erodes our decency, degrades our dignity. I don't yet know how they will tell the story of this era, but I want to tell you the story of this day. Let the record show that today, justice won, that we did our job, that we kept our word, that we stood our sacred ground. Let the record show that we did not let you down. I love you. Listen to Mom.
Gentleman's
I'll be
time
home
has
soon.
expired. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm going to reserve my time for the moment.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lee.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. First of all, let me just say, I taught my children that there were consequences if they broke the law. I am saddened, but I'm not shocked that we are here today considering articles of impeachment against President Trump. I am saddened, but I'm not shocked because of the pattern of corruption we have seen from this president. Yes, I am saddened, but I'm not shocked because this president has routinely shown his disregard of Congress and the rule of law. The facts are not in dispute. The president abused his power, defied the public's trust, and betrayed his oath of office. He undermined our elections by corruptly soliciting foreign interference in our elections to benefit his own future re-election efforts. Then he obstructed Congress every step of the way in an effort to cover it all up. Donald Trump has been and remains a threat to our national security, a clear danger to our democracy, and wholly unfit to serve as President of the United States. We have an obligation to act today to uphold the Constitution, but also to show our children and grandchildren that no one is above the law, and that includes the President of the United States.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I continue to reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I'm happy to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Trahan.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Speaker, today I rise to defend our democracy. In this chamber, we debate the nation's most pressing issues, and often reasonable people can draw different conclusions. But not today. The facts are black and white. President Trump abused the power of his office for personal and political gain, and then he engaged in a cover-up. It is up to us to confront those facts and vote to preserve and protect our democratic republic. This is not a fight I or my colleagues sought out when we ran for Congress, but it is one we pledged when we raised our right hand and swore an oath to defend our Constitution. Anything other than a vote to impeach will be read as a vote endorsing a future president without rules or consequences. And anything goes, no holds barred brand of executive branch authority that will leave us weaker and surely undermine what the framers passed down. We owe it to future generations to transcend personal interests and party loyalty and vote our conscience for what's really at stake here today, the sanctity of our Constitution and the sanctity of our democracy. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I continue to reserve my time.
Continues to reserve. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record an October 23rd New York Times article entitled, "Ukraine Knew of Aid Freeze by Early August, Undermining Trump Defense."
Without objection, so ordered.
At this point, I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Sarbanes.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of the 2 articles of impeachment against President Trump for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Voting to impeach the president is a weighty decision. It is not something you reach for. It's something you are brought to reluctantly when the evidence presented can no longer be denied. In this sober and historic moment, members of Congress are called upon to uphold our oath of office and our duty to the Constitution. Today, we answer that call. The President's actions compromise the national security of the United States, undermined the integrity of our democratic process, and betrayed the trust of the American people. In soliciting foreign interference, President Trump took direct aim at the heart of our democracy. The American people should decide our elections, not a foreign country. As long as the President continues to invite foreign interference into our democracy, the integrity of the 2020 election remains at risk. The question is, will Congress allow the President to place his personal interests above those of his country? I urge my colleagues in the House to join me in answering that question with a resounding no, because no one, not even the President of the United States, is above the law. I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I continue to reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record an October 9 Politico magazine article entitled, "This is what a legitimate anti-corruption effort in Ukraine would look like," which explains that legitimate requests are made through the DOJ's Office of International Affairs and pursuant to the United States Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty.
Without objection, so ordered.
At this point, I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Castro.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
The President abused his power. He violated his oath of office. He sought to elevate himself as a dictator, a king. But we are not a monarchy. We are the United States of America. We are a republic, a democracy, where the executive does not have absolute power. America was founded on a system of checks and balances. When the president withheld military aid to vulnerable Ukraine and pressed for a personal favor to manufacture dirt against a political opponent, he went too far. He undermined America's national security. He sought to sabotage our elections. He elevated his personal interest over the interest of America. Then he tried to cover up his scandalous behavior, and he obstructed the investigation. He violated his oath of office, but I intend to uphold mine to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. The president must be impeached today. I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I continue to reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a December 5th Boston Globe editorial entitled Impeach the President.
Without objection.
And I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a December 11th USA Today editorial entitled Impeach President Trump. The President's Ukraine shakedown and stonewalling are too serious for the House to ignore.
Without objection.
At this point, I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, throughout this process, I listened as a member of the House Oversight Committee to career diplomats testify in depositions and found myself contemplating the gravity of this decision. One of my daughters asked then how I'd make my decision about impeachment. I told her that when her future children learn about President Trump's impeachment, they may ask, "Mommy, what did Grandma do?" I want my daughter to be able to tell her children, "Grandma did the right thing because in America, no one is above the law." With his conduct around Ukraine, President Trump corruptly abused his power for his own interests at direct odds with our national welfare and our Constitution. This president put his interests before those of this nation. Left unchecked, he'd do it again, and had said so. The actions and ongoing schemes that led us to this moment are severe threats to our national security and democracy that we cannot defend or dismiss. With history watching, I must fulfill my constitutional duty and vote to impeach this president. His corrupt conduct and assault on our Constitution leave no other choice. I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I continue to reserve my time.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Khanna.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, the House is voting to affirm a conservative principle. What makes America the strongest and most prosperous nation in the world is our reverence for the rule of law. It is our love of the law that protects our freedoms, our private property, our families from the exercise of arbitrary power. The real threat to American leadership in the 21st century is internal decline. We choose not to stand idly by while we see the corrupting of our body politic with an attitude that might makes right, that winners don't have to follow the rules. In voting to impeach, we remember Lincoln's Lyceum Address. Let every American, every lover of liberty, every well-wisher to his posterity swear by the blood of the Revolution never to violate in the least particular the laws of this country, and never to tolerate their violation by other. Let it be taught in schools and seminaries and in colleges. Let it be written in primers, spelling books, and in almanacs. Let it be preached from the pulpit, proclaimed in legislative halls, and enforced in the courts of justice. And in short, let it become the political religion of the nation.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I continue to reserve. Just to advise through the chair, my friend, I'm waiting for an additional speaker, but we reserve our time at the
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a December 17th CNN article entitled Fact Check, Trump's wild letter to Pelosi is filled with false and misleading claims.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman. Madam Speaker, I rise on this solemn occasion as we, the House of Representatives, exercise the power given to us by the United States Constitution. The original Constitution was flawed in some respects, but with respect to presidential misconduct, it was unmistakable. The framers knew that presidents could be corrupt or abusive with their power, and so impeachment was written into our organic law. Since taking office nearly 3 years ago, President Trump has consistently and intentionally divided this country. He has consistently encouraged foreign actors to interfere in our elections. He has thumbed his nose, Madam Speaker, at the legislative branch. Enough is enough. We must protect our Constitution, our democracy. I will vote today to prefer serious charges against President Trump and deliver the charges to the Senate for trial, a place where President Trump can defend himself and attempt, if he chooses, to convince the Senate and the American people that his conduct does not violate the Constitution. I thank the gentleman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to my good friend, distinguished combat veteran for our country, Mr. Baird of Indiana.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, today marks a sad day for America. Instead of getting to work to solve the issues of our time, the House Democrats have decided to try to discredit President Trump and the undue results of the 2016 election. The facts here are clear. The President did not commit any crimes. He did not break any laws, and there was no quid pro quo. This has been a secretive, misdirected process from the very beginning, and the American people see right through it. I look forward to voting against this impeachment charade and getting back to work to support the efforts of President Trump to continue growing our economy, creating jobs, and improving the lives of all Americans. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Boyle.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, this is the fourth impeachment proceeding against an American president, and the most serious. The president committed numerous crimes threatening the national security. Ultimately, the matter before us today is not a question of fact, for the evidence is undisputed. Nor is it a question of law, as the Constitution is clear. The heart of the matter is this: will members of this House have the courage to choose fidelity to the Constitution over loyalty to their political party? For the sake of our Constitution and our country, for Americans today and tomorrow, I urge all members to summon the courage to uphold the rule of law and vote yes. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I continue to reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to hold Donald John Trump accountable for his repeated abuse of power, his deliberate obstruction of the House's constitutionally mandated oversight responsibilities, and his unprecedented misuse of the presidency to weaken the separation of powers and subvert our Constitution by dangling $391 million in congressionally appropriated tax dollars over the head of an embattled ally in order to coerce a fraudulent investigation into a potential political opponent. Our founders feared a lawless, amoral president would willfully put national security at risk for his own personal gain. In 1974, Republicans made it clear that their ultimate loyalty was not to one man, but to upholding the Constitution. Today, the uncontested evidence shows Donald Trump violated his oath of office. My friends on both sides of the aisle can either defend him or defend the Constitution. History will not permit you to do both. I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma continues to reserve.
I do, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Can I inquire of the gentleman how many more speakers he has?
I'm prepared to close when my friend is.
I'm prepared to close.
Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized to close.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I yield myself the balance of my time.
Recognized.
Madam Speaker, before I begin my formal remarks in closing, I want to say one thing for the record. I have great respect for all my friends on the other side of the aisle, and I am sure they're voting their convictions. So when I vote mine, please don't imply I'm doing it for my political party. I'm doing it because it's what I believe is right. And I do believe I can defend both the President and the Constitution of the United States, and I think that's exactly what I am doing. Madam Speaker, I cannot oppose this rule strongly enough. The process we saw leading up to it today was a complete charade. It was a closed process, an unfair process, and a rushed process, and it could only have ever had one logical, predetermined ending. Throughout it all, the majority trampled on minority rights. They refused to call witnesses with relevant firsthand knowledge. They relied on hearsay news reports to make their case. They denied Republicans the right to hold a minority hearing day, and they refused the President of the United States his due process rights in the committee that was actually conducting the impeachment process and investigating him. And in the end, what was the result? Articles of impeachment based on an event that never happened. A purported quid pro quo that did not exist. Aid that was allegedly withheld that in reality was never withheld at all. And a narrative of intent based on nothing more than fantasy. Madam Speaker, we deserve better than this. Impeachment is the most consequential act the House of Representatives can undertake. It must not and cannot be based on a flawed process. It cannot come at the expense of minority rights or due process to the accused. It cannot be based on a vendetta against the President that the majority has pursued since the day it was elected. And it cannot be based on nothing more than spin and hearsay. I oppose this rule, and I oppose the flawed and unfair process. Madam Speaker, it's a very solemn vote that all of us will cast. I want to end by, number one, thanking my good friend, the chairman of the Rules Committee, for conducting the kind of hearing he conducted yesterday. But I also want to underscore again, we are very violently opposed to the process, very strongly opposed to the rule, think this is a charade and been very unfair. So, Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote no on the previous question, no on the rule, no on the underlying measure, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I yield myself the remaining time.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, let me thank my friend Mr. Cole for his kind words, and I appreciate his leadership in the Rules Committee and the fact that he respects this institution. But Madam Speaker, let me say again what happened here. The President withheld congressionally approved military aid to a country under siege to extract a personal political favor. That's a cold, hard fact. The question before us comes down to this. Should a president be allowed to ask a foreign nation to interfere in an American election? You know, I remember my first political experience as a middle schooler in 1972, leaving leaflets at the homes of potential voters, urging them to support George McGovern for president. No relation, by the way. I remember what an honor it was to ask people to support him, even though I was too young to vote myself. And what a privilege it was later in life to ask voters for their support in my own campaigns. I've been part of winning campaigns, and I've been part of losing ones too. People I thought would be great presidents, like Senator McGovern, were never given that chance. Make no mistake, I was disappointed, but I accepted it. I would take losing an election any day of the week when the American people render that verdict. But I will never be okay if other nations decide our leaders for us. And the President of the United States is rolling out the welcome mat for that kind of foreign interference. To my Republican friends, imagine any Democratic president sitting in the Oval Office, President Obama, President Clinton, any of them. Would your answer here still be the same? No one should be allowed to use the powers of the presidency to undermine our elections, period. This isn't about siding with your team. I didn't swear an oath to defend a political party. I took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. And when I vote yes on this rule and the underlying articles, my conscience will be clear. I ask all of my colleagues to search their souls before casting their votes. I ask them all to stand up for our democracy, to stand up for our Constitution. Madam Speaker, I urge a yes vote on the rule and the previous question. I yield back the balance of my time, and I move the previous question on the resolution.
The question is on order in the previous question on the resolution. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On that, I would request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of adoption of the resolution. This will be a 15-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 229, the nays are 197. The previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Gentleman from McGovern.
Madam Speaker.
Gentleman requests a recorded vote. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 228, the yeas are 197. The resolution is adopted, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is yet laid on the table. House will be in order. Members will take their conversations off the floor. Pursuant to House Resolution 767, the House will proceed to the immediate consideration of House Resolution 755. The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 61, House Resolution 755. Resolved that Donald John Trump, President of the United States, is impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors, and that the following articles of impeachment be exhibited to the United States Senate. Articles of impeachment exhibited by the House of Representatives of the United States of America in the name of itself and of the people of the United States of America against Donald John Trump, President of the United States of America, in maintenance and support of its impeachment against him for high crimes and misdemeanors. Article 1, Abuse of Power. The Constitution provides that the House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachment, and that the President shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. In his conduct of the office of President of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional oath faithfully to execute the office of President of the United States, and, to the best of his ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, Donald J. Trump has abused the powers of the presidency in that, using the powers of his high office, President Trump solicited the interference of a foreign government, Ukraine, in the 2020 United States presidential election. He did so through a scheme or course of conduct that included soliciting the government of Ukraine to publicly announce investigations that would benefit his re-election, harm the election prospects of a political opponent, and influence the 2020 United States presidential election to his advantage. President Trump also sought to pressure the government of Ukraine to take these steps by conditioning official United States government acts of significant value to Ukraine on its public announcement of the investigations. President Trump engaged in this scheme or course of conduct for corrupt purposes in pursuit of personal political benefit. In so doing, President Trump used the powers of the presidency in a manner that compromised the national security of the United States and undermined the integrity of the United States democratic process. He thus ignored and injured the interests of the nation. President Trump engaged in this scheme or course of conduct through the following means. 1. President Trump, acting both directly and through his agents within and outside the United States government, corruptly solicited the government of Ukraine to publicly announce investigations into A, political opponent, former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr., and B, a discredited theory promoted by Russia, alleging that Ukraine, rather than Russia, interfered in the 2016 United States presidential election. 2, with the same corrupt motives, President Trump, acting both directly and through his agents within and outside the United States government, conditioned 2 official acts on the public announcements that he had requested. A, the release of $391 million of United States taxpayer funds that Congress had appropriated on a bipartisan basis for the purpose of providing vital military and security assistance to Ukraine to oppose Russian aggression, and which President Trump had ordered suspended. And B, a head of state meeting at the White House, which the President of Ukraine sought to demonstrate continued United States support for the government of Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression. 3. Faced with the public revelation of his actions, President Trump ultimately released the military and security assistance to the government of Ukraine, but has persisted in openly and corruptly urging and soliciting Ukraine to undertake investigations for his personal political benefit. These actions were consistent with President Trump's previous invitations of foreign interference in United States elections. In all of this, President Trump abused the powers of the presidency by ignoring and injuring national security and other vital national interests to obtain an improper personal political benefit. He has also betrayed the nation by abusing his high office to enlist a foreign power in corrupting democratic elections. Wherefore, President Trump, by such conduct, has demonstrated that he will remain a threat to national security and the Constitution if allowed to remain in office, and has acted in a manner grossly incompatible with self-governance and the rule of law. President Trump thus warrants impeachment and trial, removal from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. Article 2, Obstruction of Congress. The Constitution provides that the House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachment and that the President shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. In his conduct of the office of President of the United States and in violation of his constitutional oath faithfully to execute the office of President of the United States and, to the best of his ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, Donald J. Trump has directed the unprecedented, categorical, and indiscriminate defiance of subpoenas issued by the House of Representatives pursuant to its sole power of impeachment. President Trump has abused the powers of the presidency in a manner offensive to and subversive of the Constitution, in that the House of Representatives has engaged in an impeachment inquiry focused on President Trump's corrupt solicitation of the government of Ukraine to interfere in the 2020 United States presidential election. As part of this impeachment inquiry, the committees undertaking the investigation served subpoenas seeking documents and testimony deemed vital to the inquiry from various executive branch agencies and offices and current and former officials. In response, without lawful cause or excuse, President Trump directed executive branch agencies, offices, and officials not to comply with those subpoenas. President Trump thus interposed the powers of the presidency against the lawful subpoenas of the House of Representatives and assumed to himself functions and judgments necessary to the exercise of the sole power of impeachment vested by the Constitution in the House of Representatives. President Trump abused the powers of his high office through the following means. 1, directing the White House to defy a lawful subpoena by withholding the production of documents sought therein by the committees. 2, directing other executive branch agencies and offices to defy lawful subpoenas and withhold the production of documents and records from the committees, in response to which the Department of State, Office of Management and Budget, Department of Energy, and Department of Defense refused to produce a single document or record. 3, directing current and former executive branch officials not to cooperate with the committees, in response to which 9 administration officials defied subpoenas for testimony, namely John Michael Mick Mulvaney, Robert B. Blair, John A. Eisenberg, Michael Ellis, Preston Wells Griffith, Russell T. Vogt, Michael Duffy, Brian McCormick, and T. Ulrich Breckbuhl. These actions were consistent with President Trump's previous efforts to undermine United States government investigations into foreign interference in United States elections. Through these actions, President Trump sought to arrogate to himself the right to determine the propriety, scope, and nature of an impeachment inquiry into his own conduct, as well as the unilateral prerogative to deny any and all information to the House of Representatives and the exercise of its sole power of impeachment. In the history of the Republic, no president has ever ordered the complete defiance of an impeachment inquiry or sought to obstruct and impede so comprehensively the ability of the House of Representatives to investigate high crimes and misdemeanors. This abuse of office served to cover up the president's own repeated misconduct and to seize and control the power of impeachment, and thus to nullify a vital constitutional safeguard vested solely in the House of Representatives. In all of this, President Trump has acted in a manner contrary to his trust as president and subversive of constitutional government, to the great prejudice of the cause of law and justice, and to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. Wherefore, President Trump, by such conduct, has demonstrated that he will remain a threat to the Constitution if allowed to remain in office, and has acted in a manner grossly incompatible with self-governance and the rule of law. President Trump thus warrants impeachment and trial, removal from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States.
Pursuant to House Resolution 767, the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Judiciary is adopted. The resolution shall be debatable for 6 hours, equally divided, and controlled by the chair and ranking member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their respective designees. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, and the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, each will control 3 hours. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material on H.Res. 755.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished Speaker of the House.
Gentlelady, distinguished speakers recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding, for his tremendous leadership in helping us honor the Constitution of the United States. I also extend my gratitude to Chairman Schiff, who will be presiding later in the day. My colleagues, this morning and every morning, when we come together, members rise and pledge allegiance to the flag. Every day, all across America, children in school, members of the military, officials, and those civically engaged also pledge allegiance to the flag. Let us recall what that pledge says. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The republic for which it stands is what we are here to talk about today. A republic, if we can keep it. We gather today under the dome of this temple of democracy to exercise one of the most solemn powers that this body can take, the impeachment of the President of the United States. No member, regardless of party or politics, comes to Congress to impeach a president. But every one of us, as our first act as a member of Congress, stood on this historic House floor before our beautiful American flag and raised our hands in this sacred oath. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So help me God. For 230 years, members have taken that sacred oath, which makes us custodians of the Constitution. When our founders declared independence and established a new nation, they crafted a system of government unlike one ever seen before, a republic, starting with the sacred words, "We the people." For centuries, Americans have fought and died to defend democracy for the people. But, very sadly now, our founders' vision of a republic is under threat from actions from the White House. That is why today, as Speaker of the House, I solemnly and sadly open the debate on the impeachment of the President of the United States. If we do not act now, we would be derelict in our duty. It is tragic that the President's reckless actions make impeachment necessary. He gave us no choice. What we are discussing today is the established fact that the President violated the Constitution. It is a matter of fact that the President is an ongoing threat to our national security and the integrity of our elections, the basis of our democracy. Hundreds of historians, legal scholars, and former prosecutors, regardless of party, have stated that the president committed impeachable offenses. Since today is a national civics lesson, though a sad one, I submit these documents for the record and commend them for students to study.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. What we are discussing today is the established fact that the president, again, violated the Constitution. It is a matter of fact that the president is, again, an ongoing threat to our national security. And the testimony of decorated war heroes, distinguished diplomats, and patriotic career public servants, some of the president's own appointees over the past weeks, have told us this. The president used the power of his public office to obtain an improper personal political benefit at the expense of America's national security. When a president weakens a Democratic ally that is advancing American security interests by fighting an American adversary, the president weakens America. This abuse of power also jeopardizes the integrity of our elections. All Americans agree that American voters should choose our president, not some foreign government. The founders understood that it is profoundly corrosive for our democracy for a president to invite interference in our elections. As George Washington, our nation's patriot, under whose gaze we stand today, warned, history and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of Republican government. George Washington. Sadly, the American people have witnessed further wrongs of the president which necessitate the second article of impeachment, obstruction of Congress. When the president's wrongdoing was revealed, he launched an unprecedented, indiscriminate, and categorical campaign of defiance and obstruction. Never before in the history of our nation have we seen a president declare and act if he is above the law. The president goes even so far as to say and act on this absurdity when he says, Article 2 says I can do whatever I want. No, it doesn't. That recklessness is a profound violation of the Constitution and our republic, which endure because of our system of separation of power, three co-equal branches, each a check and balance on the other, a republic, again, if we can keep it. The founders' great fear of a rogue or corrupt president is the very reason why they enshrined impeachment in the Constitution. As one founder, William Davie of North Carolina, warned, unless the Constitution contained an impeachment provision, a president might spare no efforts or means whatever to get himself reelected. Another founder, George Mason, insisted that the president who procured his appointment in the first instance through improper and corrupt acts might repeat his guilt and return to power. We in Congress, Article 1, the legislative branch, must stand up and make clear to the American people and to all people that this body still stands by the principles enshrined in the Constitution and defended by generations of Americans. Last week, in observance of the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge, members traveled to that hallowed ground to express our gratitude to the heroes of freedom who sacrificed everything to secure victory of freedom over tyranny, not just for America, but for the world. The veterans of that battle, who were there in their 90s, told us how after the war was won, the Europeans to whom they liberated would ask, why did you risk us? You don't know us, and give your lives to save us. We're not Americans. And our men would say, we came here to fight for you, not because you are Americans, because we are Americans. As our beloved Chairman Elijah Cummings, an Oversight Committee Chair, our North Star, said when announcing his support for this action, quote, when the history books are written about this tumultuous era, I want them to show that I was among those in the House of Representatives who stood up to lawlessness and tyranny. He also said, almost prophetically, when we are dancing with the angels, the question will be, What did we do to make sure we kept our democracy intact? Elijah, as you know, has since passed on. Now he is dancing with the angels. And I know that he and all of us here are very proud of the moral courage of members who want to honor the vision of our founders for a republic, the sacrifice of our men and women in uniform to defend it, and the aspirations of our children to live freely within it. Today, we are here to defend democracy for the people. May God bless America. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady is back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And we are here today to enter into a debate that should surprise no one. This has not been a surprise, and it's not even something that we would have not thought about. From the very moment that the majority party in this House won the inevitability that we would be here today was only a matter of what date they would schedule it. Nothing else. In fact, how it even began to look even further was on September 24th. The Speaker announced an impeachment inquiry before even seeing the call transcript that we're going to hear so much about today. You know, it's not about what this body can do and its constitutional oath. And there's been a lot of constitutional and founders thrown around and will be all day today. But there's one thing that I will mention all along, and that is also the founders were very concerned about a partisan impeachment in which politics of the majority who have their strength can do what they want to do irregardless of any facts. In fact, I've said it before and I will say it again. I do not believe, no matter what was said today and even what has been said, this is not a solemn occasion. When you go looking for something for 3 years, and especially this year since January, you ought to be excited when you found it, but they can't. Because I know what is now happening. It took me last night, but I was thinking about it. Why do we keep calling this a solemn occasion when you've been wanting to do this ever since the gentleman was elected? Mr. President came forward and did what he thought fit for the American people, but yet they wanted to impeach him. And see, it hit me. Now I know. The reason they wanted to is now they're realizing what I told them and have been telling them for the last few weeks, that the clock and the calendar are terrible masters. The clock and the calendar are terrible masters. They do not care about anything except getting the time done and the calendar fixed. They do not care about facts. They do not care about time. And one day the clock and the calendar will hang along this body in a very detrimental way. How do I know this? Because one of our members, Ms. Télé, said on the night she was sworn in, we're going to impeach. Well, you know the rest. In May of 2019, Al Green said, I'm concerned if we don't impeach this president, he will get reelected. That is probably the most prescient thing said by the majority in the last year, is they said we can't beat him if we don't impeach him. There's a reason behind this impeachment. And even Speaker Pelosi said it would be dangerous to leave it to voters to determine whether President Trump stays in office. Really? After we just said the Pledge of Allegiance, we go back to the Speaker's own words and said it would be dangerous to leave it to the voters? I will tell you right now, Madam Speaker, we on the Republican side have no problem taking our case to the majority and to the people of this country because they elected Donald Trump, and it is a matter for the voters, not this House, not in this way, not in the way this is being done. It has trampled everything this House believes in. I said it yesterday, and I believe it to be this true today. I will fight this on process, which has been deplorable, to use a word of the majority. It has been awful. The calendar and the clock make it impressive that we actually do it quickly. We don't care about rules. We don't care about minority hearing days. We don't care about giving the opportunity for witnesses to be called because the chairman gets to determine what is relevant. Wow, that's pretty good. Let the accuser determine what is relevant to the one being accused. The people of America see through this. The people of America understand due process, and they understand when it is being trampled in the people's house. You see, it's also not a matter of process, which will be discussed today. It's a matter of actual facts. I will fight the facts all day long. Because what we found here today is a president who did not do as being charged. In fact, they had to go to abuse of power, this amorphous term that you're going to hear many, many arguments about how that abuse of power, except for one thing. The call itself, the two parties say no pressure. Nothing was ever done to get the money. In fact, they didn't even know the money was held. But there is something that very much bothers me about the facts. There were 5 meetings, we'll hear about those today, in which there was never a linkage made. There was one witness that is depended on over 600 times in the majority's report that in the end, after questioned, had to say, well, that was my presumption of what was happening. You see, this is an impeachment based on presumption. This is an impeachment, basically also a poll-tested impeachment on what actually sells to the American people. Today is going to be a lot of things. What it is not is fair. What it is not is about the truth. What is true today, and I just heard it just a moment ago in the articles themselves where it said, and the speaker, I believe, actually talked about this as well, is that the president weakened a foreign leader. You know what the truth of the matter is? Madam Speaker, the most interesting and deplorable thing that I've heard over the last few weeks is the actual attack by the majority on President Zelensky. Because they realize their whole crux of their case is that if he was not pressured, their house of cards falls. And by the way, it's already failed. But if we can't show pressure, then we either have to call him a liar, a world leader, or we have to make up names to call him. And that's exactly what happened in the Judiciary Committee when a member of the majority actually said he's acting, or they're complaining to a battered wife. That is below the dignity of this body. To take a world leader, and when he doesn't make your case for you, to belittle him. Especially, as is going to be often said by the majority, that they're in the middle of a hot war with Russia. You see, President Trump actually did give them offensive weapons. President Trump did nothing wrong. We're going to talk about that all day long today. We went on process and we went on facts. Why? Because the American people will see through this. But before I close this first part, I will have to recognize that even the Senate, the minority leader in the Senate, recognizes that the House did not do their job because he can't make the case to his own members, so he's having to ask for witnesses, ask for more time. You see, and even yesterday, it was sort of funny. I thought it hilarious. The minority leader in the Senate went out and did a press conference and said, they denied my witnesses. They denied my request. Well, welcome to the club, Mr. Schumer. That's exactly what's happened over here for the last 3 months. Amen. So today, we're going to talk a lot about impeachment. We're going to talk a lot about our president, and we're going to talk about 2 articles of impeachment. Abuse of power, because they can't actually pin anything of factual basis on him. The president did nothing wrong in this issue. And then they're going to talk about obstruction of Congress. You know, obstruction of Congress, as I've said before, is like petulant children saying we didn't get our way when we didn't ask the right way and we didn't actually go after it and try to make a case. You know why, Madam Speaker? The clock and the calendar are terrible masters. And the majority will own that problem today because to the clock and the calendar, facts don't matter. The promises to the base matter. And today is a promise kept for the majority. Not a surprise, a fact. And with that, I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, the House of Representatives must now consider 2 articles of impeachment against President Trump. The first article charges that the President used his public office to coerce a foreign government into attacking his political rival. The second article charges that the President took extreme and unprecedented steps to obstruct our investigation into his conduct. Taken together, the 2 articles charge that President Trump placed his private political interests above our national security, above our elections, and above our system of checks and balances. After months of investigation, there can be no serious debate about the evidence at hand. On July 25th, when he spoke to President Zelensky of Ukraine, President Trump had the upper hand. The President, through his agents, had already demanded that Ukraine announce an investigation of his political opponents. Ukraine needed our help, both military aid, which had been appropriated by Congress because of our security interests, and an Oval Office meeting to show the world that the United States continues to stand with Ukraine against Russian aggression. President Trump should have been focused on the interests of the American people on that call. Instead, he prioritized his private political interests. President Trump asked President Zelensky for a favor. He wanted Ukraine to announce 2 bogus investigations, one into former Vice President Biden, then his leading opponent in the 2020 election, and another to advance a conspiracy theory that Ukraine, not Russia, attacked our elections in 2016. Neither request was premised on any legitimate national security or foreign policy interest. One was intended to help President Trump conceal the truth about the 2016 election. The other was intended to help him gain an advantage in the 2020 election. After the call, President Trump ratcheted up the pressure. He deployed his private attorney and other agents, some acting far outside the regular channels of diplomacy, to make his desires clear. There would be no aid and no meeting until Ukraine announced the sham investigations. To our founding generation, abuse of power was a specific, well-defined offense. A president may not misuse the powers of the presidency to obtain an improper personal benefit. The evidence shows that President Trump did exactly that. For this alone, he should be impeached. But the first article also identifies two aggravating factors. When President Trump conditioned military aid on a personal favor, he harmed America's national security. And when he demanded that a foreign government target his domestic political rival, he took steps to corrupt our next election. To the founders, these offenses clearly merited removal from office. The President faces a second article of impeachment for his efforts to obstruct our investigation of his misconduct. The Constitution grants the sole power of impeachment to the House of Representatives. Within our system of checks and balances, the President may not decide for himself what constitutes a valid impeachment inquiry, nor may he ignore lawful subpoenas or direct others to do so. Many presidents, including President Trump, have asserted privileges and other objections to specific subpoenas. But only President Trump has ordered the categorical defiance of a congressional investigation, the automatic rejection of all subpoenas. The President is not above the law, and he should be impeached for this as well. Congress cannot wait for the next election to address this misconduct. President Trump has demonstrated a clear pattern of wrongdoing. This is not the first time he has solicited foreign interference in an election, has been exposed, and has attempted to obstruct the resulting investigation. We cannot rely on the next election as a remedy for presidential misconduct when the President threatens the very integrity of that election. He has shown us he will continue to put his selfish interests above the good of the country. We must act without delay. By his actions, President Trump has broken his oath of office. His conduct continues to undermine our Constitution and threaten our next election. His actions warrant his impeachment and demand his removal from office. I urge my colleagues to support these articles, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is my pleasure at this time to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensenbrenner.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to impeaching the President. The Constitution says that any civil officer, including the President, may be impeached for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Unlike the Nixon and Clinton cases, there are no allegations that the President has committed a crime. We've had almost 3 years of nonstop investigations. We've had the Mueller report, we've had the Schiff investigation, we've had the Nadler investigation, and at no time is there any evidence that indicates that Donald J. Trump violated any criminal statute of the United States. So why are we here? We're here because the majority caucus, the Democratic caucus, has been hijacked by the radical left. They have wanted to reverse the course of the 2016 election ever since Donald J. Trump won that election. So let's look at these two phony articles of impeachment. First of all, abuse of power. The phone call in question had the President say, "Our country has been through a lot. I want you to do us a favor. Not me a favor, us a favor." And there he was referring to our country, the United States of America, not a personal political gain. He was not afraid to let this transcript go public, and he released the transcript almost immediately after the call. Now, the second article, impeachment, obstruction of Congress, it basically says that unless the President gives us everything we want and when we want it, then he's committed an impeachable offense. That's a bunch of bunk. The president has certain individual and privileges by virtue of his office. Whenever there's been a dispute between the executive and legislative branches heretofore, they've gone to court. And the Supreme Court a couple weeks ago said they would take jurisdiction over deciding whether the president had to comply with one subpoena relating to his tax returns. Now here, the Democrats have been bent to impeach the President of the United States before the court decides this. And this means that there's a rush job to do this. And why is there? Because they want to influence the 2020 elections. And they spent 3 years doing it. They spent millions of taxpayers' dollars, including the Mueller report, putting together this impeachment. And they also have had this Congress wrapped around impeachment and not doing their jobs until the dam broke this week. Stop this charade, vote no, and I yield back.
Yields